Right, hello, welcome to the Sisyphus complex solution, and it's that time again where I do the quarterly world population data. Before I get started on that, I'll just have to do a little bit of a message in Japanese, if you don't mind. And so, 日本から誕生日メッセージありがとうね。あのもちろんだんだん年取ってるけどしょうがないよね。どっちにしても。まあ、ありがとうね。よろしく。まあ、来年もよろしくね。Okay, so sorry about that little interlude. I also have to have another little message before I get going, which is that I'd said at the end of last week's episode that I didn't really understand the purpose of that Unite the Kingdom march, because I like to see things have a purpose in terms of answering the then what question. So after the day, then what do you do? Um, it's, I still do feel the same way about that, but I do have to give them some kudos and some congratulations for the fact that the kind of numbers that turned up, the excellent behaviour of everybody that turned up, and how successful it was. And you can tell it was really successful because of how it brought out all the hateful remarks from the usual suspects, which, yeah, you've got to like that, haven't you, really? So on the basis of having humiliated them alone, I think it did wonders as far as that's concerned. So that's a good part. So you have to give credit where it's due. So as far as the episode is concerned, that this is the 9th instalment of the world population data, and the reading that I'll be presenting today, and that was done on September the 15th, and so that means there's a total of 66 months, 5.5 years worth of data now. And whilst the data may seem on the face of it a little bit banal, really, there is something very different compared to the previous 2 years, and so you'll come to understand as I go through the information. So into the episode. Right, so this is the raw data for the continent of Asia. Generally speaking, with raw data and that, there's very seldom something that really sort of stands out. So it's just to put it up there, and that's so that you know that I am having the actual information gathered correctly. The month by month average variation data, this is where you can see the difference that I've been talking about in terms of appearing somewhat banal compared to the previous 2 years, because the previous 2 years had these very distinct population shifts forming these diamond shapes. And so considering this year it has not happened, and I can say in advance that this is a pattern that's going to be replicated across all continents, I think there's something that we can potentially read as a signal here, only potentially, just my kind of guesstimate, shall we say, that I'll go into a little bit in that when I start going into the European information. But just for the time being, then let's just finish off Asia. Right, so here is the last 12 months, then the total change that they've had since the beginning of me doing the data, what that turns out to be as a percentage of the population, and then the annual percentage as to whether it's a population increase, decrease. So I'm not really going to spend too much time on talking about the Asian nations, because like I said, there's not really an awful lot that stands out of interest, and so I'm just going to do the little bits in terms of the countries that everybody has some interest in, really. 日本はいつかまだやりますけど、今回はやらないね. So let's start off with putting up the information of the countries of China and then those that are supposedly at war. Obviously, China keeps falling at fairly high levels, so we can see that they've distinctly got a problem, and that obviously I have spoken about that one before, that it could be a much bigger problem than the data suggests, but dealt with that before. In terms of those countries that seem to be being claimed as being at war all over the place, and in particular this Philistine nonsense, each one of them is increasing in population, and I find it absolutely farcical that Philistine population is rising at a higher rate than Israel. It's just this constant propaganda and the wailing of victimhood, and it's not standing up to scrutiny. I mean, I'm for the longest time, and I've been really quite bored with the whole genocide type of narrative, and I mean, I've been bored with it ever since, basically since October the 8th, and that, with the nonsense about me open prison and all the rest of it. And every time I turn around and see these people that are pushing this propaganda, and I just stick the information underneath it and say, can you explain why the population is increasing? And then I'll put the numbers by the side of it. Not a peep. Nobody has a clue. All it is genocide. That's it. And it's absolutely ridiculous. I think anybody that is trying to make a response to get some kind of semblance of truth around this, just stick numbers underneath their nose and say, can you just give me an answer? Everything that you're claiming doesn't stack up. If you can't answer, not interested, go away. And that includes all of these people that are still running around protesting. But anyway, whatever. Boring people. So let's go into Europe. And so here's the raw data. Again, nothing overly dramatic for you to be able to see here. The month-by-month variance, here again you can see that pattern of the past 2 years has not taken place. And Europe does kind of present some possible, I mean, obviously there's two parts to this really, and that there's possible indicators as to what might be happening, and then there's possible single root source impact that might explain what's happening. But then you have to try to consider that from a wider world perspective. This may or may not add up. So, like I said, there's going to be some perspectives that are mine as far as this is concerned. So let's go into a little bit more of the granular details. Right, so here you can actually see the numbers that go into the raw data. And dealing with the UK first, obviously. Whatever these continual liars say in Parliament, and that your Fabian socialist liars, and we're deporting this person, we're deporting that. No, you're not. It's the same situation as it has been. The same rate of importing from the third world that we've had for basically for 5 years solid now, and we know that's the case because we don't have the replacement levels from the domestic population, so it's literally all foreign imports. So, as I say, ever since I've been taking the numbers, 5.5 years, and I dare say if I was to try to look towards some historical data, we've been having this problem since 2017 in terms of the kind of punishment for daring to having voted the wrong way, put it that way. So that continues, and I dare say, dealt with it before, but I dare say the numbers are actually significantly higher, but nevertheless. Right, this time I'm going to skip past doing the Russia-Ukraine nonsense, because you get the same situation as you do with the Philistine one. I'm not interested in the propaganda around that. And so let's just go straight through them, that to 5 nations in particular that I want to start having a bit of a look at. There's a few others that will come into the picture, but so this is for Italy, Spain, France, Holland and Portugal, where I'm adding Portugal because of actual experience. Now the data that I'm showing here is for each of the same periods for the past 3 years. So those periods when we had that population shift, you could call it an anomaly, or you could call it something that indicated people moving around at very high levels. There's slight variation with 2023, simply because that covered a 6-month period rather than the 3 months that I've been doing ever since then. Because that's I started making sure that I was delivering it on the 15th of every quarter since December of 2023. So, but you get the understanding as to what's been going on with the month when you look at it from a monthly variation. So there are dramatic differences in the numbers that are quite plain to see. And this past 3 months represents the kind of numbers that you tend to be witness to on a more continual basis. So like I say, those 3 summer months have been more of an anomaly than the rest of the year. The fact that we're now seeing something that is equivalent to like a flatline data, this kind of indicates that obviously the heavy fluctuation is changed, but does it mean we're seeing something that is bringing an end to this mass movement of people? Well, we have to understand a few factors around that, which are not necessarily to do with the imports from the third world, but some of the things that the EU countries have been doing. And so we get this particular example article that I want to demonstrate from July of last year. Now, particularly in Spain, but not limited to Spain, they had this situation where they had useful idiots going around the streets targeting tourists to squirt water pistols at them and generally be annoying towards the tourists and demanding that they leave. So predominantly in the larger cities. This became a problem across quite a range of cities, but the issue that they were pointing towards was that they were complaining about the cost of housing in particular, and how the cost of housing, and then obviously then that leads into the cost of living for them themselves, has got to such an extent that it's become beyond the reach of the domestic populace. Now, we've known this kind of issue inside the UK as well, and that because of the likes of London. And I can say distinctly that Lisbon as well so Portugal has the exact same problem. I mean, in Lisbon, the rental market for effectively like a not particularly big single bedroom flat is generally costing more than the average monthly wage, and that's a kind of situation that's been replicated across a lot of cities in Europe. Now, the thing about that, it means that what you've got is a situation whereby supply and demand economics just don't apply. There is no logic to say that this is an issue of supply and demand, because these exceptionally high costs for housing what it's resulting in is a real glut of empty housing. And so, because the majority of people can't afford to rent or buy them, and so they're just sitting there empty. It is not a case of we don't have enough. They don't have enough housing. It's just a case of they've been priced out of the market. So, if supply and demand did actually apply in these circumstances, that it's just by default that could never happen. So what we've got a problem with then is an issue of what is known as an artificial market across Europe, and obviously applies in the UK as well. So we can identify that the problem is not supply and demand. And so what that does mean is the people that have been going around targeting tourists have also then by default got to be the way that they're being organised and the way that they're targeting tourists. It does mean that they are effectively, insofar as I'm concerned, just being tools for useful idiocy. Because quite frankly, it seems patently obvious that the tourists are not the problem here. They are not taking up all of that empty accommodation. That you only have to walk around these cities and you can see the empty places. There's no tourists in there. They're not responsible for it. I mean, only an absolute moron would walk around and go, "Oh yeah, that's the tourist's fault that place is empty, and that I can't afford it. It looks like an absolute crap hole. Costs an absolute fortune. There's nobody in it. Must be a tourist's fault." You've got to be a bit stupid to do that. So I don't think these people think as per usual. So by default, when you've got a bunch of people that are going around protesting for something that isn't happening and targeting the people that are not responsible, then kind of by default that means that they're basically going around, who are they being a useful idiot for? Well, it's the very people and organisations that are actually responsible for the problem in the first place, because not very clever people as usual, as always. And that it'll be some sort of left-wing extremists and that are determined to support their own downfall. But this year, and as a direct result of what these idiots were doing from last year, the consequences have started to evolve. So, not satisfied with the coronavirus having destroyed various parts of industry, these fools are now assisting in the demise of the hospitality and wider sort of tourist industry. And in doing so, they're then turning around and saying, well, how did it come to this? We've scared the tourists away. Oh no, all of our businesses are failing. Duh. I mean, absolutely staggeringly stupid that you want to go around attacking. I mean, even if it is just with a water pistol, it's still attacking people. You want to do that, and then you wonder why nobody wants to come back. Because it's not just the UK tourists. I mean, yes, in Spain you will get a lot of people from the UK, but they're doing it to anybody that isn't from that city. So including others from the European Union, and then from anywhere else in the world. They'll be doing it to the Americans, Canadians, New Zealanders, Australians, blah blah blah. They've just gone and destroyed their tourist industry, which they were very heavily dependent on. So then, because this EU wider agenda, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, is loaded with absolute scumbags that are determined to destroy people's lives and the economy that they depend upon. Europe is now considering implementing caps And in other places, many places already, in that they've started to put in tourist taxes. And this is supposed to be their method of dealing with this fake problem. And they're throwing in some of the most utterly retarded complaints of saying, effectively, you've got too many customers. If tourists turn up and your hospitality trade and your wider tourism trade does well, apparently that's a problem. Go figure. Now they are being, as per this article, they are being warned of the consequences, but quite plainly they don't care, because frankly this is the aim. Their response to these kinds of warnings and how much they're going to lose and how many, in terms of finances, the jobs, all the rest of it, to really make things so much worse, their response to that is to make it even worse. Because now, not going to live in the European Union, just literally if you want to go and have a week's holiday, apparently you're going to be treated like a criminal just to enter and have a short holiday. Fingerprinting. Do you think that's going to have a positive or a negative effect? Utterly ridiculous. So for these, the Ramona types, and their so-called, I want my freedom of movement. I think people really do need to understand the basics behind why there would have been a period of this. We'll have this Schengen agreement, the freedom of movement between the countries that are members. Try to understand what the purpose of that might have actually been. Because when you come across something that everybody comes to expect, when you're presented with something and then you get your likes of your Ramonas thinking that that is the greatest benefit because that's all they ever go on about, that and the food, as if that really does that matter? If that's the only thing that you're thinking of, you're not thinking. When that kind of situation has been put on a plate for people, gullible people, then comes the time when they say, no, we're going to, it's conditional. Oh, you want your freedom of movement, do you? Oh, well, if you just give us your fingerprints. Oh, if you just give us your data. Oh, if you just give in to this, if you just give in to that. Not really rocket science, is it? When you actually understand this kind of wider agenda that has been taking place. Obviously, there was a bit of a spoke put in the wheels by the fact that in 2016, hence the migration punishment, the UK basically didn't really care. And I dare say most people didn't actually understand that this was the aim, but they didn't really care one way or the other anyway. And I will point out that a lot of the complaints about immigration were happening long before they started throwing the third world at us. And so if they're doing something like this to the UK, do you really think that you're going to be able to get all those tourists back? When people think, do I want to be going to Spain for a week or 2 weeks and be treated like a criminal in order to do that? Nah. What they've done there is they've initiated a process where they've done them are on a virus, and they're destroying their own industries again. So there's two parts to this that you need to understand realistically. And the first is the actual problem of this artificial market in the cities in particular, because it's no coincidence that each of the cities that are pushing forward this limited access and taxation and basically destroying their own industries, pretty much all of those cities are part of this C40 cities cult. Now, this is just a sample of the type of scumbags that are behind that particular agenda, that are doing their utmost to be able to throw people out of their own cities. And so I've just got a few select organisations for you to understand. Take a look at the actual link itself so you can understand the wider organisations that are behind this. And as far as the UK is concerned, and that, then we can say yes, the UK government is directly involved in this. They are being the enemy of the people again. Obviously, the European Union, of course they are. You can see, you got your George Soros, the Lord's Foundation, the Nazis. It's exactly what you would expect. But anyway, before I go any further on this particular point, I will say that you absolutely do need to be understanding, as far as the UK is concerned, you need to be understanding the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill. Because whilst Europe is looking towards destroying their cities there, the Labour Party, who are pushing this particular bill through, they are pushing this law through it's got nothing to do with English devolution, and it's literally about handing powers to the mayors that are part of this C40 Cities programme to be able to steal your property. And I kid you not. If anybody checks the book teaser that I announced last week, link in the description to it, there's an explanation as to the 4 areas where they are looking to steal your property so that they can capture the cities. But this is also what those European cities are being subject to as well. So the problem that is going on, obviously, with these ridiculous protests based off of completely the wrong things, just so that they can get their temporary 30 pieces of silver, I suppose. The problem that they're missing is actually relatively simple. Because the people that are giving them those 30 pieces of silver, they're going to be, so like your Open Society and that, and the government organisations, in particular old mini Mike Bloomberg that sits at the top of it, the billionaire, the American billionaire that they don't really mention. Everything is all a problem if Elon Musk gets involved in anything. Not a word about mini Mike Bloomberg. But what they're missing is understanding who it is that is buying up all these properties and then sitting on them. Because it's pension funds. It's not landlords trying, small landlords or anything like that trying to rip people off. It's pension funds. And that's a wide range of different pension funds as well. Because they're the only ones that are able to buy up land in prime locations and be able to price it out of the reach of the general population and not worry about the revenue stream. This is a situation that I recognise because I do have a background in real estate, because I have worked with real estate and that in a number of different countries, having had a base for that in Japan, but I've dealt with the US, Australia, New Zealand, Sri Lanka, blah blah. And the thing about working in real estate is that if it's your money on the line, you don't just sit on prime land, because it costs you a fortune to do that. Now, you can have long-term investment into land that is based on speculation for the future, and what that basically means is like a greenfield site that you're literally you're gambling on, really gambling with a little bit of understanding as to what's taking place, but a gamble nonetheless. That at a particular point in the future, developments will move in that direction, hence your land value increases. I've done that before. But what you don't do is leave something that would be essentially a working asset, an already existing building smack in the centre of a city. You would not leave that empty, because the costs would be prohibitive. You need to have it earning for you. You can't just buy big pieces of property and have no return on it. The real estate market requires, if you can achieve it, around about an 8% yield. You're not going to get that from leaving something empty, are you? Any company that is genuinely involved in real estate would go bust very, very quickly if that was the methods that they were employing. It just wouldn't work. So, when you're dealing with a pension fund, however, and then the pension funds that then are also operated by asset management companies, they're getting their money from pension contributions no matter what. So they're not dependent on the revenues from the real estate. They can look towards other sectors as well to kind of have try to balance things out, and even that's not really working at the moment. I mean, if you see a number of the different pension funds and asset management companies that are pushing this whole ESG kind of stuff, the performance is appalling. And one of the reasons why the performance is appalling is because they're doing things like this. But the point is, it's not their money that they're putting at risk, is it? It's the pension fund that everybody, largely through government organisations and professional organisations, that's where they're getting the money from. So as long as they're getting their monthly payments, they don't care. They don't care about the return on investment that a pensioner actually requires. So they can afford to sit on an empty property in a prime location, because the value being artificially kept high, because they are then having that agreement with both local and national governments and supranational governments in order to be a part of that command and control economy, the favoured few, who will then help them, assist them in maintaining that artificial economy and keeping those prices high. As long as that price is high, it's staying on the balance sheet. The revenue is not that important to them. It's maintaining it on the balance sheet. When you've got a situation like that, of course you're going to end up with lots of empty homes, high prices. It's all done artificially to be able to get you out. It's done intentionally. So basically what it means is your money, my money, the very people that are being denied access to any kind of affordable property, their money. It's all going towards funding this denial of access through overpricing, through distorting supply and demand. It's got absolutely nothing to do with tourists. It's got nothing to do with, and as much as I think it's a bit of a problem anyway, but things like that Airbnb, I really don't like all that gig economy stuff. All you're doing there and that is just reducing the value of everything, and not in the case of a positive kind of deflationary perspective, but in terms of keeping standards down. That is a problem, but it's not the problem. Like I say, you would not have all these empty properties if it was all about Airbnbs all over the place and tourists taking up everything. It's just not true. Now there's a second part of the agenda, the overall agenda, where the consequences are intended, and you're going to start to see things start to happen. And from some of the initial research that I've been doing in the background, has already actually started to happen. And here we have to go back to that document, UK Fires Plan, which does apply across a much wider jurisdiction than just the UK, because they want the flying and the shipping down to zero by 2050. The more you're putting off people that freedom of movement that is now being withdrawn, the less people are going to be moving around, less people are going to want it's not them turning around, and it's really sneaky in so much as it's not a case of them saying, no, you're not going to be allowed to fly anymore. It's, oh no, it's your choice. Are we going to put the prices up? Are we going to fingerprint you? Are we going to inconvenience you more? We're going to implement all of these digital systems to surveil you. But it's your choice, right? Well, obviously a lot of people are going to turn around and say, no, my choice is no thanks. That's how you achieve this. I can say that in terms of the flights having consequences, there was a flight that used to be able to be taken to from the UK into France, and fairly close to the Bergerac region. It is no more, which means in order to be able to get to that region of France, you've got to now spend about 3 hours by car, rather than what you used to have, which was literally 20 minutes, half an hour. They're going to inconvenience you to make this happen. You know, various things that they're going to do to push their authoritarianism, your Agenda 2030 plan. And then they will have all of those useful idiot, retard leftists going around protesting about things that have got nothing to do with anything, so that you get distracted and think the problem is something else. So, to me at least, it does seem likely that what we are going to start seeing is, and the only way that populations will be able to shift around, is what level they're going to be able to continue with this, with their operated low-grade immigrant human trafficking program, because it is them doing it. It's not some random gang. It is the government's doing it, and the NGOs, the useful idiots, all being done by the same sort of people that are pushing that C40 cities program. So just to be absolutely certain, that's so that people do understand my perspective on this as well, that I do despise the European Union in terms of the organisation itself, the Brussels Institute. I fucking hate them. They can stick their Nazi-style papers, please situation. Give me your fingerprints. They can stick that one right up their jacksie. Because I, for one, would never do that. I've had situations before where I have actually done that. I had it when I moved out to Japan. So you're going back to 1991 for that. And I was very confused about it at the time. And there were protests that started kicking off in Japan during the 90s because of that type of situation. But at the time, it was too late. I was already over there. Work was starting. Family was there. I thought, well, okay, well, I've got not really got a great deal of choice. Well, I have the choice now, and my choice is no. So I think you'll find that there's going to be an awful lot of people from around the world, not just from the UK, that will feel the same way. If they want to do that sort of thing, and that if they want to turn the European Union into this 1930s Germany program, no interest. And let's see how well those idiots getting their 30 pieces of silver to go around and spray tourists. Let's see how their lives turn out. It is unfortunate in terms of places like Lisbon, because they were also being named as one of the cities where people were going around doing this, and it didn't happen. It was false reporting. And it's been very noticeable this year, the reduction in tourists, but an increase in the third worlders coming in. Careful what you wish for. And I really do think that, I mean, despite the likes of people like Viktor Orban saying, oh no, we need to change things from the inside. No. You need to just get out. Get out. The European Union, and it is done together with the UK as well. I'm not going to say that the UK is not involved in this, because they bloody well are, and they have been since the start. This whole thing needs to be taken down. And this is one of the key reasons why you cannot trust these idiot leftists and the rhetoric that they're coming out with, because they are literally assisting in the demise of your nations. So you pay attention to that sort of thing. But I do have something that is a little bit more positive. This is the information for Serbia, which from the population alone, you might not think is a positive story. But I did have the good fortune recently to stay in Sombor for a week. That's Sombor, that's what that says there. And so for those people that accommodated me, thank you once again. It was lovely. You might kind of wonder what this has got to do with the matters that I've just discussed about Europe, but I'll kind of come to that. But since I've been taking the data, Serbia has lost nearly a quarter of its population in just 5.5 years. And you can see that during the same period last year, there was again another very significant drop. But in terms of this year, it's not been replicated. The year before that, so again, this issue of the 2 years previous, large drops. This year, not being replicated. That's potentially a good sign. Now, the main considered reason for why Serbia is having this kind of an issue in terms of the drop in population is because of what's been called the brain drain. And so, if I want to sort of be very, very specific, if I looked at, if I give you the information of the size of the population of Serbia when I first started this on March 15th, 2020, their population was 8,737,371. As of September the 15th, 2025, it's 6,679,243. This would be considered an issue. Now, in terms of this brain drain, it basically just means that lots of people are leaving Serbia, trying to find a better life elsewhere. They've become educated, they can find positions in other countries where they think they can, presumably because they think they can find a better life. Obviously, there will be other factors, such as low birth rates, but even that as well is kind of influenced by this brain drain situation, because it is the younger people that, the people of child rearing age that tend to be leaving the country. So the birth rate is obviously going to be affected if the births are taking place elsewhere. I mean, I did notice, just as a bit of an aside, that they do have a bit of a trait of putting posters on the trees of people that have recently passed as some kind of like a form of public notice. And the ages of the people that were on these posters did seem to be quite wide ranging. It wasn't like a picture and a name of people that were all old age pensioners. But as much as it was, I mean, I actually found that to be quite a nice touch, really. And it's not really any different to people putting the announcements in the paper, really. It's just more of an immediate way of being able to notify people because they would have known them in the area. I didn't become uncomfortable with it or anything like that, because I thought, well, if we did something like that here, we'd probably see something similar as well. That there'd be a whole range of different people of different age groups that had passed on. So, I didn't think it was disturbing or anything like that. Just a bit of a point of cultural interest, really. And I actually thought it was quite, I suppose I found it quite comforting in some way, that they do actually let the people in that immediate area know what's happened, because they'd be walking past. They might not see something in the paper. I thought it was a good touch, but anyway. Now, I can obviously consider the history of Serbia, and you don't have to go too far into distant history to be able to understand some of the issues that have taken place there, because they have been subject to war, and in particular the hyperinflation and a range of different political struggles since breaking free from communism. And in terms of the hyperinflation situation, you have to understand that they had the second longest hyperinflation in economic history. I mean, between 1992 and 1994, their daily inflation hit 62%. So let me repeat that one again. Daily inflation. Not annual, daily. Ridiculous. So, I mean, this is something that, all these retard champagne communists that are trying to destroy the cities across Europe might want to understand the implications of what it is they're actually pushing for. And the people in the UK as well. And all of you idiots in your Green Party, all it's about wealth tax and idiots. Absolute idiots. Honestly, you've got no clue what it is that you're wishing for. So obviously it's been a hard slog for Serbia. And it doesn't really help when most of the West tends to focus the little knowledge that they have of places like Serbia based on things like Milosevic. talk about Serbia, and Milosevic will inevitably come up because I mean he held the presidency up to 2000, and then obviously there was the trial for the war crimes at The Hague, and all of this is only 25 years ago. So yeah, obviously that's the thing that most people try to remember. I mean, I even had some relatives that turned around and said, "Oh, what are you going to Serbia for, you nutter? Grow up. Understand it's not 2000 anymore." So let's have a little bit of an understanding as to what the economy has been like in Serbia between 1996 and 2024. Now, obviously, I've stated before on a number of occasions that I don't particularly like GDP as an indicator, but it's what most people want to see, really. And you can see the big dips from the times of turmoil. And if you look towards the more recent data, and it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with things, looking at things from a domestic or an international perspective, when you get a situation where you've had the most recent hit that they had, which was in 2020, obviously because of the coronavirus situation, their economy fell by -1% as a result of that. So we're talking about this particular dip here. For a bit of perspective, the UK for the same time frame fell by 10.3%. Serbia stood up pretty well in that particular circumstance. So recent developments in Serbia are actually not that bad. At the moment, they're running at around 3.9%. So obviously you had the upward trend as a result of coming out of that coronavirus situation, and it's levelling out. And they're levelling out at around 3.9% growth. Could you imagine the level of preening that you would get from idiots in the Labour Party or anywhere in the rest of Europe if they could hit that kind of a number? People don't mention that about countries like Serbia. They're doing well. Now, obviously, the average salaries, cost of living, so forth, is obviously a lot lower. But quite frankly, I mean, it's the standard of living that's important, really. And by that, I mean, are people being able to afford to live? Have they got work? What do the streets look like? Is there a lot of crime? All this sort of stuff. And I mean, you can tell that kind of stuff by just sort of walking around with your eyes open. And I can say firsthand that absolutely, Sombor in particular, because that was where I went, momentarily in Belgrade, but I mean, that's just sort of going to the airport and whatever, and that, so I don't really know about that. Though I did speak to people as well from Novi Sad, and yeah, they say it's busy and typical sort of city type of expectations. But the only sort of issue that they said was, well, it was nice to be in Sombor because the air is fresher. That's it. But as a comparison to the UK and Europe, walking around Sombor was incredibly pleasant. And they have good summers as well. I mean, I can say that the education that kids get, that's also a really important factor. The education standard they have there, and that is absolutely fantastic and completely void of all of that leftist shite that we get. You know, they're not turning around and telling the kids to check their underpants every day, see what sex they are today. The adults are actually adults in so much as they can do things like deciding what for themselves, where the perfect example that I really did enjoy over there, you can decide whether you want to have a ciggy in the pub or not, because you're an adult, the way that it used to be. I loved that part of it. It was absolutely fucking glorious. But like I say, it was clean, tidy, peaceful. The teenagers that you could see going around on bikes and that, and they're not rampaging idiots. It was a nice place to be. I mean, I also love the fact that you could go around and see some of the Yugo cars from about 40 years ago. I mean, I dare say most people won't remember the days when there were Yugos around. And then I suppose the closest example that somebody might kind of associate it with, and that's what Skodas used to look like. I mean, even around that time, and that Nissan was fairly early at that point as well. And lots of people considered all these sorts of cars to be complete cheap tat at that point. They were plainly built to last. Good cars. Nothing wrong with them at all. Now, obviously, like I said, I was there during the summer, so it does get hot out there. Really nice weather. That does mean then that I haven't experienced the winters. And I can say that from the information that I've gathered, it is possible that a nighttime temperature can go as low as -20 Celsius or -4 Fahrenheit. But from what I was being told, that is really quite a rare occasion now. And generally speaking, that it goes down to about 0. So yeah, it is freezing in winter, but nothing that you couldn't deal with, and nothing that a nice glass of rakia wouldn't cure. So shifting away a little bit from being the Serbian Visitors Bureau, there is an issue with Serbia, which is where I come back to this point about the political situation. Now, obviously, I'm not going to delve too deeply into this, but there are protests taking place out in Serbia at the moment, particularly in Belgrade. And this began last year after the collapse of a train station roof. And I can also vouch to say that the train system in Serbia is not exactly what you'd call modern. But because I've found that the people in Serbia do tend to be much more grown up in the UK and the EU, insofar as being able to talk about politics, instead of this idiot notion that people want to try to push you towards in sort of thinking that talking about politics is considered to be impolite or something like that. You know, that's just to make you try to not pay attention. But they are kind of wondering why they have the problems that they have in terms of situations like that roof collapsing. And I mean, I suppose the brain drain situation isn't really helping in terms of people staying there and helping the economic positive position that they are experiencing and translating that into certain parts of infrastructure development. But the problem is, it's kind of making them think, well, their president must be the problem. He must be absolutely corrupt as hell. And so they'd be better off joining the European Union, because when they've had the brain drain, most of them are going into places like the European Union. and so they're thinking that that will make them better. Also, it doesn't probably help the fact that they've got close ties and they're right next to Hungary. And as much as I like Viktor Orban, his stance of staying in the EU and thinking that he can change it from within, I think is a bit of a pipe dream. He should do the right thing really and turn around and have conversations with the Serbians on a wider level and go, really, you might want to hold your horses on this. So a common complaint out there is that this President Vucic, I think is pronounced, that he's a corrupt politician. Well, I mean, let's face it. I mean, if he's a politician, then yeah, he probably is, to a certain degree. Just like they all are everywhere. But they're not really seeing the danger of jumping from the frying pan into the fire, insofar as this is concerned. Now, Vucic is also making a somewhat grave error that too many have made already, where he also then thinks that that the problems can be solved of the falling population by importing from the third world. That's not going to go down well. It really isn't. And the honest advice that I could give over something like this, assuming it reaches where it needs to, he'd be far better off doing some kind of promotion and looking towards people from the UK and the EU that do see the problems of the European Union and indeed what's taking place in the UK and say, instead of falling for that, why don't you come here? I guarantee you'd probably get an awful lot of takers, and you'd be far better off doing that than bringing in 100,000 Ghanaians. I said the image that is intentionally spread across Europe, where people seem to think that Serbia is some kind of dangerous place to be, it's just not true. And they'd be probably wiser to make that known a little bit more. If they do need those people, I mean, first and foremost, try to get your people back. But if you need more, then look for people that are a little bit more suitable, shall we say. Now, he's also making comment of something that I also recognised, which he is saying that the initial protests have started to escalate because they are being subject to interference from the West. And despite the fact that lots of people are turning around saying that there's no evidence for that, I would suggest he's probably correct. We've seen what the UK, EU and US leftist agenda machine can do to nations. We saw what they did to the Ukraine, for a prime example. The Western nations, in particular the likes of the UK, they already run Bosnia. I know people will tell us, oh no, Bosnia is actually run by the three different groups. You know, you got your Croats, your Serbs, and then basically your Muslim lot, the Albanians, Ottomans. But no, it is actually run by an international organisation. And then you've also got the problem of the likes of Tony Blair having his tentacles in Kosovo. So anybody that did want to have plans within Serbia to ensure that this foreign interference was cut off, it would be unwise to dismiss those kinds of links, and it'd be unwise for people in Serbia to fail to understand that what you're saying does have some legitimacy. And keep in mind, if you are from Serbia, when you was Yugoslavia, you are the nation that demonstrated that NATO is not a defensive alliance. NATO came and bombed Yugoslavia. They can go on about Milosevic and all this sort of stuff and that as much as they like. NATO had no right and no place to be shifting from a defensive alliance to an offensive alliance, which is exactly what they did. There needs to be some recognition that the agenda and the lunacy that infects the West right now will have its eyes set on the likes of Serbia and try to bring them into subservience. And when that happens, guaranteed, it will not just be the Ghanaians that will be coming in. I'm sure they will do everything that they can to push something that you should already be very well aware of, and the problem of when you get this Islamic populace in your nation, and they'll probably make the Albanians or the old Ottomans and that, they'll make them look quite tame, to be frank. You know, remember the term balkanization, that's where it comes from. It comes from former Yugoslavia. You know what it's like. You don't want it pushed on you again. And these bastards from the European Union in particular will do just that. So, if the Serbs want somebody different to Vucic, obviously that's entirely down to them. I understand some of the kind of arguments that they were making about some of the things that he was supposed to have done. But I would say that I implore the people within that nation not to make the mistake of thinking that the European Union is your answer, because it isn't. It would be your downfall. The shift that is taking place at the moment, the shift towards prosperity, would end immediately. Look at what the European Union are doing to their own people. Have a look at France at the moment. See what's going on there. Have a think about some of the things that I've mentioned in this episode, but then more importantly, just have a look and see what is actually happening in reality in Europe, and then ask yourselves, do we want that? I'll give you another example of when I was in Sombor, and I could see what are effectively like abandoned dogs sort of roaming the streets, because apparently they don't have some kind of a dog catcher system over there. And I was told that this occasionally that you can see a bit of an issue in that, in terms of the actual responsible dog owners. They might have the odd occasion where they have a little bit of a face-off with some of these wild dogs. So, you know, I'm not going to say something that is claiming that they've got zero problems on the basis of this, but the dogs that I saw that were just wandering around the streets, on most occasions, they'd be wandering around a little bit and then they're just sitting down and sunbathing. It's really weird. You've not got this situation where you've got dogs gathering, you know, these wild dogs and that gathering in packs and causing problems. They weren't causing a major nuisance. Each one of them obviously knew where they could go, which particular homes were, you know, putting out a bit of food for them. They weren't feral. They weren't foaming at the mouth. They weren't dangerous to society or anything. Even the dogs are better behaved. It's really quite an unusual thing to behold. And then if I compare that to Portugal, every single day I could see people from the domestic population, so I'm not talking about some sort of ragtag immigrant, actual locals trying their best or seemingly trying to do their best to maintain some kind of an appearance of being civilized, dress-wise. They're trying to keep themselves clean. But they're going through the bins of the apartment blocks and the houses. Literally every single day they're coming along and checking the bins. Whether they're looking for the food and that, I'm a little bit less convinced of that. But they were looking for items that they would be able to use or take home. Because when they're doing this during the day, because obviously they don't have any work. I didn't see any of that in Serbia. I saw youths standing on bridges over the rail tracks, hurling bottles at the trains. Didn't see any of the youths behaving like that in Serbia. Do you really want to join the European Union? It's a strange situation when you come across you can visibly see that abandoned dogs in Serbia get better treatment and behave better than what is becoming an increasingly feral population of Portugal. And you can see it in France right now as well. And probably across the whole of the European Union. Do you really want to join something like that? If anybody still doesn't understand, talk to, I'm probably going to get his name completely wrong here, but I think it's Ryszard Legutko from Poland, academic and politician. I've added a link in the description to his book called Demon in Democracy. You'll kind of get a better understanding as to the fact that Poland's got a common background with places like Serbia. So you'll understand each other. And he is pointing out the similarities between European democracy and communism. It's not what you want. Find your own way. If you do need to import anyone, improve this false image that people have. Promote the opportunities that can be offered. I mean, obviously, in that when you turn around with the kind of salaries that you could offer, it is going to be less than somewhere like the UK. But just balance it out by saying, yeah, but the cost of living. Anybody that doesn't understand those kind of equations, you're probably not going to need them anyway. You've got a whole bunch of people that are within Europe and that seem to make the mistake of thinking that moving to places like Sweden and Finland is a good idea because they don't mind the cold weather. Well, encourage them to come to Serbia instead, so long as they're not leftist idiots. There are policies that could be implemented, and the point of this in terms of population is that you could be bringing people home. It's not all about, do we need to increase the birth rate? It's, can we bring the brain drain back home? Those kinds of situations can take place as well. Do the things that make sure that you can avoid this agenda trap. And like I say, the fact that the young people out there and that are so incredibly well educated, the kind of, you can be selective as the type of investment, so not these big agenda mongering bastards. Be selective about the kind of manufacturing investments, innovation investments that you could be able to bring in, because you do have the brain power there. I hope you do something like that for your own sake. Anyway, that's like I said, it's kind of like a what I did during my summer holidays report, but it is relevant in terms of how we can address these issues around population and nations that are suffering the levels of drop that we can see from the figures. So, moving into America, I'll start moving along a little bit more swiftly now. So, here's the raw data, month by month variance, and again, continuing this theme of very little change. And, you know, are we seeing something that is indicating a halt to these wide-scale population shifts? Possibly. Now, here's the main data for the past year, and as far as that's concerned, the US, I mean, we are fed this narrative about mass deportations under Trump, and because we've got 9 months worth of data now, it's just not showing really. I mean, at this time last year and the year before, the numbers were 10 times higher than now. So, there is that. But if anyone wants to try to spin this narrative saying that the population is going down, that's not happening. That much is quite clear. Okay, as far as Australasia is concerned, here's the raw data. Here's your month by month variance, again following that same pattern, with just one exception that I'll go into briefly. So here's the granular information, at the data in numbers, and there is a notable drop overall in terms of the per year percentage compared to last time, because during the last quarter we had it at 1.8% when it's dropped down to 1.77%. But the standout nation is New Caledonia, where they've had a population drop that is similar to last year. They're the only nation that is showing that kind of repeat pattern. Now, we are dealing with a nation then that's only got a populace of around about 250,000, so it doesn't really take too much for them to see some level of movement of significance. But it is worth looking at this French colony, because, yes folks, you heard that correctly, a French colony. Despite what you'll hear from all of the leftist retards, it's not only white English that have had colonies. The French do as well, and of course every single Muslim Islamic nation. But nevertheless, what is the deal with New Caledonia? Well, the political failings in France are having knock-on effects, and the attempts by the New Caledonians to not be French are being pushed back. There's also been some issues in terms of this particular occasion with delayed budgets and some financial issues that have then been responsible for some deaths that took place in protests the year before. And so if you look at the kind of situations that took place last year, and then the drop that's taking place this year, the deaths themselves and that don't cover the level of drop by any stretch of the imagination. I think it was something like about 15 deaths. But what is actually happening to explain the drops in the population here is the French are doing what the French do, and they're running away. whenever there's a problem, we have a white flag and off they go. So I have also noticed from the local news in terms of New Caledonia, they're subject to a whole range of issues that people should come to recognise by now, because old Jeff Bezos is pushing his climate hard agenda and sticking his nose into things. Because, it's all about Elon Musk, isn't it? No, no, it isn't. When you've got the climate hards out there sticking their nose in, there's going to be problems. And that's exactly what's going on here, because when you've got a bunch of Malthus worshippers gaining access to your small nation, don't be surprised if the consequences of that cause you an issue. So bit of a problem taking place out in New Caledonia. In terms of South America, here's the raw data. There's the month by month variation. Similar pattern. It's leveled out. When it comes down to the granular data, I suppose, main point of interest here is that not only has South America actually sort of stabilised in terms of the movement of the population, it has actually achieved a slight increase, because, in terms of the per year average, because it's gone from 0.34% in the last quarter to 0.35% this time. So some positive movement. It's not such a big extent that I can turn around and go, here's precisely why. You could turn around and possibly say, what's going on with Argentina? But nothing of significance for me to be able to absolutely pinpoint. Here's the African raw data, and obviously you can see that you are talking about a populace that is growing in the majority, but still relatively stable rates. And so, because there is a relatively stable rate there, I'm kind of wondering whether this is going to have some impact in terms of the populace being sent into Europe. This is kind of, again, this is what I've been alluding to in terms of scenarios around what's taking place in Europe at the moment. Have we reached a point where it's hitting an off-ramp in terms of this mass migration? Possibly. There's the variation, again, reflecting this stabilisation. So, in terms of the African information, and again, just to be saying up front, as much as we can notice that despite the overall numbers rising, the per year percentage for Africa is falling again. And again, because that's notable in terms of happening just over a single quarter. Now, I have referred previously to Nigeria, including last time when I put up their information and pointed out about the particular Islamic problem that they have. But I wanted to have a quick look at Nigeria again. So here's the information for the last year. And what you have to understand with Nigeria is that they're the third largest growth nation in the world, only coming behind India and Pakistan in terms of them being higher numbers. Now, in terms of Nigeria, this is obviously going to be something that is going to make the ideologues pay attention to them, as you'd expect. And there's a particular paragraph from a 2023 article that gives you a bit of an idea as to what they've had in mind, including the overall article as well. But the way that the external, so this is not about what Nigeria wants to do for themselves, it's about those central planners and what they think should happen. And they think that turning Nigeria into communist India and China, and just in case you were under some kind of delusion, indeed, India, Modi, He is a commie. They want to be looking at the Nigerian population as mere human capital, because that's what they do. And they want Nigeria to move into the area of being menial work. I mean, they're saying, oh, put them towards IT. No, what they mean there, in reality, is menial data entry for pennies. That's what they mean. They want to use these people to be able to put in the data for the digital prisons that they're creating for the rest of the world. Now, you know it's going to be a problem due to the kind of shitbags that are actually speaking about this, because you've got this cult of sustainable rural transformation, and then the child abusers of UNICEF. Now, I did recently make a bit of a faux pas, because I was talking to somebody about UNICEF, and I actually did mean to say UNESCO in terms of child abuse, because UNESCO are serious child abusers. But I can still use the term child abusers for UNICEF, because they also have a record of precisely that. So just to clarify that. Now, where the true situation for Nigeria should be concentrated is that they do have an actual opportunity that is being denied to them. And again, this is where I come into this situation when I'm putting up the numbers of deaths around the world because of the climatard nonsense. And so on that basis, I've got a little bit of advice for Nigeria, which is effectively to throw all of these commies out of your nation, which will then also have a knock-on effect in terms of preventing this feeding of all the Islamic terrorists that keep coming in. And once you've done that, or started to do that, what you've got in Nigeria is a very much resource-rich nation. And a great deal of it, the access is being denied. Now, obviously, they have to come out with the, oh, because of the sun and all that sort of stuff and that, oh, you could do the renewables. To a certain degree, possibly. But it's not your primary resource by any stretch of the imagination. And the discussions that should be taking place shouldn't be focused on how your increased population should be reversed. It should be a case of saying, if there's going to be any chance of not just being subservient to the West and the Malthusians, you might want to have a good look at using your resources and not having these Malthusians telling you that you're not allowed to use your resources in your own nation. The size of the population that they have in Nigeria means that you've got an enormous customer base to be developed. You could even go so far as to say you've got enough in Nigeria to develop your own bubble economy. And what I mean by that really, and that is that you could have domestic companies whose focus is purely on the domestic market, and they're looking at a potential client base of over 250 million. How many companies around the world do you think have that many customers? Not that many. A company that has got that kind of a client base, they do well. Countries like Nigeria need to recognise some basic facts really, which is that you don't need all of these scumbag organisations coming in and faking their good intentions as they try to figure out how they can kill you. Because there are no good intentions from these people. It would be a good day across Africa, not just Nigeria, when everybody actually starts to understand this and rejects all of the interference, whether it's coming from Western parasites, commies, or anybody else. Look towards developing your own a proper education system, which doesn't have to come at some sort of massive cost. And there are potentials for you to be able to develop on your own. And so you can actually stop being fundamentally a backwards continent. There's enough Nigerians that are out in various countries around the world. I mean, if I remember rightly, not that I'm suggesting that Kemi Badenoch is any kind of intellect whatsoever, because she isn't. But even she would have enough knowledge to be able to come back home and go, here's some of the things that we need to do. Again, start to utilise your own assets. Stop being dictated to by people that really, really hate you. Just a simple thing. And if you go to the Nigerian government website about their resources, they don't make any mention of the oil and gas that they have there. I mean, it's not to say that the development of the oil and gas sector in Nigeria that would cure everything, because it wouldn't. But it'd be a bloody good start, wouldn't it? And you've got an awful lot more in terms of minerals and all sorts of things. And then you look towards going, well, what do we need for the domestic market in terms of dealing with everybody else? We'll look at what the excess is. We'll look after ourselves first. It's beyond time that countries started doing things like that. So, from a world perspective, I've got to start with the abortion data, because this past 3 months has seen abortions go up over 3 times the number of the first 6 months. I mean, it's just staggering. I mean, and if I want to kind of consider a mild positive side to this, is that last year saw total abortions of 73 million. So could they possibly end up by the end of this year in that being less than last year? We'll see. But you are heading into the months and that where an awful lot of births do take place, so you can only hope, really. But I mean, that's disgusting numbers. So for the world data, I can say that the per year percentage has dropped from 1.24% to 1.22%. So not good, but you know, not the doomsday that you do tend to get from certain people. Now, the per month average, using the 5.5 years total data to create that average, that has continued to fall as well. And considering that the high summer numbers that we've seen in the past 2 years were the reason why the average is high, it's likely that even if we do have some kind of plateau of this mass movement, it'll still take a little while for that to be able to reach any kind of leveling out. So I wouldn't be overly concerned about the negative numbers there. But obviously the core problem does remain Europe, of course. And when I'm talking about Europe and that, I am obviously talking about the wider continent, not just the European Union. You know, they are not the world, despite what they might think of themselves. But if we had the kind of conversations about places like Serbia and then also Moldova, which has got an even bigger problem than Serbia, the kind of conversations that are presented today, and start to look towards the kind of systems that would enable their economies to continue in the path that they're taking, and make sure that they don't put up the barriers and then these artificial markets, especially artificial real estate markets. If they ignore all and just completely deny entry to all of this wider agenda scum that are so desperate to kill and destroy everything, then you might be able to see some conditions that can create the potential for families to thrive. So it'd be a case of not only bringing people back home and then possibly some suitable additional talent, but then bringing those birth rates back up, because people would have the kind of lifestyle that would enable that. So overall, really, it's a case of are things levelling out? Are we going to see this situation where these mass movements from the third world into Europe especially, is that coming to an end? Are they now starting to, like with the UK, I mean, despite absolute farcical way that they're doing it, with this, we've accepted 3,000 today, we've sent one back. I think the conditions are being laid for them to try to present it like they've cured that which they created. That's a potential, based off of what I'm seeing from these signals. Main point to take into consideration there, and that is if they do start trying to spin that narrative, just know that they're lying, because they are the traffickers. I suppose if we look at the issues within each of our own nations, there's always going to be some kind of cause and effect related to not just what happens domestically, but what influence other nations have on us anyway. Not just from agenda mongers and that, but just like general trade, things like that. And giving consideration to these kind of wider movements around the world, it's not a case of looking at that from some kind of globalist moron perspective. You can look at the globe and without being a member of the World Economic Forum, but if we do look at these kinds of things and get a clear perspective of what is going on, where the resources are, where expertise could be shared, the nations that do have abundant resources would be able to have considerably more benefit than they've got at the moment, which would then have the knock-on effect of increasing the benefits from the nations that can't cope with this utter nonsense of multiculturalism, which is a nonsense. That's not multiculturalism, that's monoculturalism. That's trying to throw everybody into a pot and hoping the stew tastes nice. It doesn't. A diverse perspective in terms of where people come from is created by where you come from. Those nations are different to us. That's what makes it interesting for people to go there. Just turning around saying, well, I like that nation, so therefore I need to have one of their restaurants down the road. No, that's not diverse anything. What makes the world interesting is if you can go to those different nations and see those different cultures. Not thinking that you can bring it back home and it's all going to be sitting nicely side by side. It won't happen. That is an absolute pipe dream. If there are nations and people that just, don't care about the problems that lunatic perspective cause, then if they want to live in that kind of situation, then basically everybody else has got to turn around and say, right, where's an island? A bit like with the climatards, the proposition that I've made about them. If you literally hate everything Let's find a piece of desert, put a nice big wall around it, throw you in there, create your utopia in the sand. Because you hate everything. So if you haven't got anything, you should be really happy. Same thing with this sort of stuff. If they say that everybody from different nations needs to all be stuck in this great melting pot, well, let's find an island, chuck them in there, and no, it would not look like America. I know that the lunatics want to try to tell you that that's what it would look like. No, it wouldn't. It'd look like what's happening in France right at the moment. It would look like all of the stabbings and violence that takes place in London all the time. That's what it would look like. So let them have it. If that's what they want, find an island, stick them in there, let them have it. And everybody else can just get on with the real world. There's really no need for people anywhere to be putting up with that mental defect anymore. So, I think that's a fairly long episode. I will also make a quick mention that for those people that seem to think that agendas and all this sort of stuff, and it's all conspiracy theory. Yet another one of the conspiracy theories has been demonstrated as being true over the last few days. The old your chemtrails, the geoengineering. It's kind of gone very much under the radar about the recent testimonies given at Congress in America, where they've admitted that it's been going on for 40 years. And it's been announced that the current Fabians have given over 56 million, I think it is, to that area, that thing that Dominic Cummings came up with, that they're going to start doing it to us here as well, with no permission. And we need to be asking, yeah, but you've been doing it here before as well. Now we know that the Americans have admitted that they've been doing it. There's going to be a push for others to admit that they've been doing it. And that, again, a bit like the coronavirus, they're experimenting on us without our permission. Don't let things like that go under the radar. All these people that say, oh, there's no agenda for this, that, and the other. Yes, oh, yes, there is. Oh, yes, there is. And every time that you say that there isn't, we keep being proven correct. But anyway, thought I'd just add that little bit of extra in. So that'll do it for this episode. Next week, back to the standard process, and then continuing with the audit of the Ministry of Defence. In the meantime, I've noticed nobody's having a look at the book teaser that I put out. Do give it a check. I spent enough time writing it. Give it a check. And then any sort of feedback or anything like that, anybody's interested in terms of being able to take that further, do let me know. And I will see you again next week. All right. Cheers. Bye-bye.